In the mahogany-lined law office, a small-town woman was about to face her wealthy in-laws' fury. What started as a routine will reading took a shocking turn when they came face-to-face with Harold Blackwood's stunning final decision. Daisy Williams-Blackwood wasn't your typical gold digger. For 5 years, she had endured their cruelties with grace, known for her unshakable integrity. When Harold left her his entire $50 million estate, she had no idea she was walking into a family war. Daisy's fight for her inheritance would expose their darkest secrets and destroy their prestigious reputation forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The rain had started just as the first mourners arrived at Greenwood Cemetery, as if the sky itself mourned Harold Blackwood's passing. Daisy stood beneath the black umbrella David held over them both, watching the mahogany casket being lowered into the earth. Her tears were real, perhaps the only genuine ones being shed that gray October morning. Eleanor Blackwood maintained her position at the head of the grave, her designer black dress and pearls marking her as the grieving widow she believed herself to be. Her tears were perfectly timed, dabbed away with a monogrammed handkerchief at precisely the right moments. Beside her, Rick shifted from foot to foot, his eyes constantly checking his phone despite the solemnity of the occasion. His jaw worked constantly, grinding through what Daisy had learned to recognize as his tells when stress overwhelmed him. Sophia stood slightly apart from her family, her lawyer's composure intact even here. She watched everything with calculating eyes, the way mourners approached, who spoke to whom, the subtle hierarchies even death couldn't erase. Her black suit was impeccable, her expression appropriately somber. But Daisy caught the way her gaze lingered on faces, cataloging reactions. "He was a good man," David whispered to Daisy, his voice thick with emotion. For all his family's complexity, Harold had been the one constant source of warmth David had known growing up. "He always treated you well." Daisy nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Harold had been kind to her when his family made their disapproval clear through 1,000 small cruelties, while Eleanor's invitations to family gatherings came with pointed reminders about appropriate dress and passive-aggressive comments about different backgrounds. Harold had simply asked about her work, her dreams, her thoughts on the books he'd lent her from his extensive library. The minister's words washed over the assembled crowd. Business associates, distant relatives, society friends who came more for appearance than genuine grief. Daisy found herself remembering Harold's last conversation with her 3 weeks ago. He'd called her into his study, that book-lined sanctuary where he conducted the real business of his life, and told her how proud he was of the woman she had become. "You have integrity, Daisy," he said, his eyes sharp despite his 82 years. "It's rarer than people think. Certainly rarer in this family than I had hoped." She had been puzzled by the sadness in his voice, the weight of disappointment that seemed to settle on his shoulders as he spoke. Now, watching his children perform their grief for the assembled crowd, she began to understand. Eleanor's sobbing crescendoed as the minister spoke about Harold's legacy, but Daisy noticed how her mother-in-law's eyes remained dry, how her performance seemed calculated for maximum effect on the crowd. Rick's phone buzzed again, and this time he actually glanced at it, his face paling at whatever message he had received. The service concluded with Eleanor accepting condolences like a queen holding court. Daisy and David waited their turn, part of the family, yet somehow separate from it. When their moment came, Eleanor's embrace was brief, her whispered words carrying an edge, despite the public setting. The ride to the law offices of Morrison Hartweller Associates was conducted in Harold's restored Bentley, the family seated in careful hierarchy. Eleanor in the front passenger seat, Rick and Sophia in the middle row, Daisy and David relegated to the back. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken tensions and expectations. James Morrison's office overlooked the city from the 15th floor, its mahogany and leather speaking of old money and older traditions. Harold had chosen his lawyer well. Morrison projected the kind of gravitas that came with handling generational wealth and its complications. "Thank you all for coming during this difficult time," Morrison began, his voice carrying the careful neutrality of someone about to deliver news that would change lives. Harold was very specific about his wishes, and he asked that I read his will in its entirety to the family. Eleanor settled herself in the chair closest to Morrison's desk, her posture suggesting ownership of the moment. Rick leaned forward, his attention finally fully focused. Sophia maintained her professional demeanor, but Daisy caught the slight tension in her shoulders. David's hand found Daisy's, squeezing gently as they prepared to hear how Harold had divided his considerable estate. To my wife Eleanor, who has maintained the social obligations of our family with dedication, I leave the sum of $5 million and the house in Martha's Vineyard along with its contents. Eleanor's smile was subtle but satisfied. It was a generous settlement, though perhaps less than she had expected. To my son Richard, I leave $2 million and my collection of vintage automobiles, trusting that he will find the stability that has thus far eluded him. Rick's face darkened at the phrasing, but $2 million was nothing to scoff at. To my daughter Sophia, who has built her own success through intelligence and determination, I leave $3 million and my collection of rare books, knowing she will appreciate both their monetary and intellectual value. Sophia nodded slightly, unsurprised by her father's measured approach to her inheritance. Morrison paused, his eyes moving to David and Daisy. To my son David, who has shown wisdom in choosing a life partner of character and integrity, I leave $1 million and the cottage in Maine, with the hope that he and his wife will find happiness there. Daisy felt David's surprise in the tightening of his grip. $1 million was more than they'd dared hoped for, enough to secure their future, but Morrison wasn't finished. The remainder of my estate, including all business holdings, investments, the family home, and all other assets not specifically mentioned above, I leave to my daughter-in-law, Daisy Williams-Blackwood. The words seemed to hang in the air, their meaning slowly penetrating the stunned silence. Morrison continued reading, his voice steady despite the shock radiating from the family. In Daisy, I have found the qualities I had hoped to nurture in my own children: compassion for those less fortunate, integrity in the face of pressure, and the strength to do what is right, rather than what is easy. She has shown more character in 5 years of marriage than others have displayed in lifetimes of privilege. Eleanor's composure shattered like crystal hitting marble. This is impossible. Harold would never... She turned to Morrison, her voice rising. She manipulated him. She's been working on him for years, playing the perfect daughter-in-law while plotting this theft. That's enough. David's voice cut through his brother's tirade, but his defense of Daisy was weak, uncertain. He looked as stunned as the rest of them, staring at his wife as if seeing her for the first time. Sophia remained seated, her lawyer's mind already working through the implications. James, I assume you'll provide copies of all relevant documents for review? This will need to be examined thoroughly. Morrison nodded gravely. Of course. I should mention that Harold anticipated some surprise at his decision. He was quite specific that the will was drawn up with full mental competence and was witnessed by 3 independent parties, including a physician who can attest to his mental state. Daisy sat frozen in her chair, the magnitude of Harold's decision crashing over her like a tsunami. $50 million. The business empire Harold had built. The estate where she had never felt welcome. All of it left to her by a man who'd seen something in her that her own family had missed or dismissed. Eleanor's voice dropped to a vicious whisper. You think you've won something, don't you? You have no idea what this family is capable of when threatened. Her eyes glittered with a malice that made Daisy's blood run cold. You will never be one of us, never, and now you've made sure of it. The lawyer cleared his throat diplomatically. There are, of course, procedures to follow, assets to transfer, business matters to discuss. Perhaps we should schedule another meeting when emotions have had time to settle. But Daisy could see in Eleanor's face that emotions would never settle. In Rick's desperate fury, she recognized a man whose carefully constructed future had just collapsed. Even David's shocked silence felt like a betrayal, his inability to process Harold's faith in her, revealing the depth of his own doubts about her worthiness. As they filed out of Morrison's office, Daisy felt the weight of Harold's trust settling on her shoulders like a mantle she had never asked to wear.
Behind her, she heard Eleanor's whispered conversation with Rick, their words too low to make out, but their tone promising future conflict. On the street outside, the October wind cut through her black dress with surprising sharpness. The rain had stopped, but the storm was just beginning. Harold had given her everything, and in doing so had made her the target of a family's rage and desperation. She looked up at David, hoping to find reassurance in his familiar face, but saw only a stranger struggling to reconcile the woman he'd married with the heiress she had suddenly become. In his eyes, she recognized the first crack in what she thought was their unshakable foundation. The inheritance was hers, but Harold's final gift came wrapped in the promise of a battle that would test everything she thought she knew about family, loyalty, and the price of belonging somewhere she had never truly been welcome. The October wind still cut through Daisy's coat as she and David climbed the stairs to their cramped apartment 3 hours later. The silence between them had grown heavier with each mile from Morrison's office. David's knuckles were white on the steering wheel as he processed what had just happened. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Meanwhile, 30 miles away at the Blackwood estate, Eleanor paced the length of Harold's study like a caged predator. The room still smelled of his cologne and pipe tobacco, but she felt no sentiment, only rage at his betrayal.
"Sit down," she commanded Rick and Sophia, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "We need to discuss how we're going to fix this situation." Rick slumped into Harold's leather chair, his face still flushed with anger. $2 million? After everything I've done for this family? For the business? His phone buzzed again. Another creditor. Another demand for payment he couldn't make. Sophia remained standing, her lawyer's mind already calculating angles. "Mother, the will appears legally sound. Harold was thorough." "Nothing is legally sound if we can prove manipulation," Eleanor snapped. 5 years that little gold digger has been working on him, playing the perfect daughter-in-law while poisoning his mind against his own children. At their apartment, Daisy sat on their secondhand couch, staring at the copy of Harold's will. David paced their small living room, running his hands through his hair repeatedly. $50 million, Daisy. $50 million! His voice cracked with disbelief. "What did you say to him? What promises did you make?" The accusation hit her like a physical blow. "David, He barely knew you before we married, and suddenly you're more important than his own children?" Back at the estate, Eleanor was orchestrating her campaign. "Rick, you know business. There has to be something in the company records, some evidence of undue influence. Sophia, I need you to research precedents for overturning wills based on manipulation." Rick's desperation leaked through his anger. "Mother, I need money now. The business deals I have pending—" "What business deals?" Sophia's voice was sharp. Eleanor waved dismissively. "We'll handle your financial issues once we reclaim what's rightfully ours." James Morrison sat in his office reviewing Harold's file. The old man had been explicit about his reasons, even recording a video explaining his decision. "She shows them kindness when they show her none," Harold had said. "She has integrity they've forgotten how to recognize." Morrison's phone rang. Lisa Rodriguez's voice was tight with worry. "Mr. Morrison, Mrs. Eleanor just fired me. She says I'm no longer needed as estate manager." At the apartment, David's pacing had grown more agitated. "My family will never accept this. You know that, right? They'll fight this until there's nothing left." Daisy looked up from the will, tears threatening. "Is that what you want? To fight me too?" The question hung between them like a blade. David stopped pacing, his face a mask of conflict. In his silence, Daisy heard her answer. Across town, Eleanor concluded her family meeting with military precision. "We contest the will immediately. We investigate every interaction between Daisy and Harold, and we make it clear to everyone who matters that she's not family. She never was." The battle lines were drawn.
with Harold's fortune as the prize and Daisy caught in the crossfire of a war she never wanted to fight. 3 days after Eleanor's war council, James Morrison called Daisy with unexpected news. Harold's will grants you immediate access to the estate. Eleanor cannot legally prevent you from entering. Daisy stood before the imposing Victorian mansion that had never felt like home, its Gothic windows staring down at her like disapproving eyes. David had refused to come, claiming he needed time to process, but his absence felt more like abandonment. Lisa Rodriguez met her at the servants' entrance, her face drawn with exhaustion. "Mrs. Daisy, I'm so glad you came. Mrs. Eleanor had the locks changed, but Mr. Morrison's court order—" She held up the key with a trembling hand. "Lisa, I'm sorry she fired you. That wasn't right. Mr. Harold always said you had a good heart." Lisa's voice broke slightly. "He talked about you often, especially these last few months. Said you were the daughter he should have had." They entered through the kitchen, where Lisa had worked her way up from housemaid to estate manager over 15 years. The mansion felt different now, larger, emptier, filled with secrets Daisy had never been allowed to discover. "There's something you should see," Lisa whispered, leading Daisy up the back stairs to Harold's private study. Mr. Harold spent hours here the last month, writing. Mrs. Eleanor doesn't know about his private safe. Harold's study was exactly as Daisy remembered, mahogany shelves lined with leather-bound volumes, his reading chair positioned by the window overlooking the gardens. But behind his desk, Lisa revealed a hidden panel Daisy had never noticed. Inside the safe lay a collection of leather journals and a manila folder marked "For Daisy's Eyes Only." Her hands shook as she opened the first journal, dated 5 years earlier, the year she'd married David. "Today, David brought his bride to meet the family properly," Harold had written in his careful script. Eleanor's disapproval was palpable, but the girl, Daisy, handled it with grace I haven't seen in this house for decades. She thanked the staff by name, asked genuine questions about their families. "My own children barely acknowledge these people who've served us faithfully."
Entry after entry revealed Harold's growing appreciation for her character and his mounting disappointment in his children. She read about Eleanor's embezzlement from the family charity, documented with bank statements and canceled checks, about Rick's gambling addiction and the $2 million in debts he'd hidden from everyone, about Sophia's cold calculation in every family interaction. Daisy is the only one who visits, not for money or favor, but because she genuinely cares about an old man's stories, one entry read. She listens when I talk about my late brother's war service. She remembers the names of my old business partners. She has shown more interest in our family history than my own children ever have. Lisa watched Daisy read, tears streaming down her face. "He loved you like a daughter, Mrs. Daisy. Said he reminded him of his mother, strong, kind, not afraid of hard work." The manila folder contained even more damaging evidence: Rick's forged signatures on company documents, Eleanor's secret credit accounts, and a private investigator's report the family had commissioned on Daisy years ago that found absolutely nothing scandalous. "They think she's after money," Harold's final entry read. "They cannot conceive that someone might value character over wealth. Daisy has never asked me for anything except my stories and my time. In leaving her everything, I'm not rejecting my children. I'm choosing the future of this family's values." As Daisy closed the journal, her phone rang. It was Morrison. "Daisy, you should know. Eleanor just hired Blackstone Investigations. They're very thorough in their methods." Through the study window, Daisy watched a black sedan pull into the estate's circular drive. 2 men in dark suits emerged, their purpose unmistakably predatory. The Blackwood family had escalated their war, but Harold's journals had armed her with weapons she never knew existed. The question now was whether she had the strength to use them. The investigator's report arrived at Eleanor's manicured hands 2 weeks later, and its pristine conclusion ignited her fury like gasoline on flames. 3 months of expensive surveillance had yielded nothing more scandalous than Daisy's volunteer work at the local literacy center
and her habit of bringing coffee to the night security guard at her office building. Clean as a whistle, Eleanor spat, throwing the folder across Harold's former study. They couldn't find so much as a parking ticket. Rick paced behind her, his desperation growing more obvious by the day. His phone had stopped buzzing. Creditors had moved past calling to more direct methods of collection. A man with scarred knuckles had visited his apartment twice this week, leaving business cards with numbers written in red ink. "We need a different approach," Eleanor continued, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "If we can't destroy her past, we destroy her present." Within days, the Whisper campaign began. Eleanor's social network, built over decades of charity galas and country club lunches, proved devastatingly effective. Phone calls were made, doubts were planted, loyalties were tested. Daisy first noticed the change at work when her colleague Sarah avoided eye contact during their Monday morning meeting. Then her lunch invitation to the Peterson account team was mysteriously canceled. By Wednesday, her supervisor called her into his office with barely concealed discomfort. "Mrs. Daisy, there have been concerns raised about your current situation. Some of our clients are questioning whether your personal circumstances might affect your judgment on their accounts." She understood immediately. Eleanor's poison had reached even here, turning professional relationships into weapons of social warfare. Meanwhile, Daisy had been conducting her own investigation using Harold's hidden documents. Rick's gambling debts weren't just significant, they were catastrophic. $2 million owed to offshore accounts with interest rates that suggested connections far more dangerous than Atlantic City casinos. Eleanor's charity embezzlement was equally damning. Over 5 years, she'd siphoned nearly $800,000 from the Children's Education Foundation using fake vendor receipts and phantom events to hide the theft. But the most devastating discovery came in Harold's final journal entry, written just days before his death. "Eleanor came to me today demanding an advance of her inheritance. When I refused, she threatened to have me declared incompetent. My own wife plotting to steal my autonomy because I won't fund her lifestyle anymore." That evening, as Daisy sat in her apartment reading Harold's revelations, David returned home looking haggard. He'd spent the day with his family, and their influence showed in every line of his face. "Daisy, we need to talk." His voice carried a resignation that chilled her blood. Maybe we should find a compromise? Give them part of the inheritance, keep enough for ourselves, and end this war." She looked at her husband, really looked at him, and saw not the man who'd promised to stand by her through everything, but a weak child still seeking his family's approval. "Is that what you want? For me to surrender what Harold entrusted to me?" His silence was answer enough. The next morning brought unexpected reinforcement when Sophia appeared at Daisy's office, her expression unreadable. "I have a proposition," Sophia said without preamble. "I think we should talk about what my family is really capable of and what you'll need to survive it."
For the first time since the will reading, Daisy sensed she might not be entirely alone in this fight. But Sophia's motivations remained as mysterious as her perfectly composed exterior, and trust had become a luxury Daisy could no longer afford. Sophia's office overlooked the harbor, its modern glass and steel aesthetic a deliberate rejection of old money traditions. Daisy sat across from her sister-in-law, Harold's journals spread between them like evidence in a trial. "I've been gathering documentation against my family for 3 years, Sophia said calmly, sliding a manila folder across the mahogany desk. "Eleanor's embezzlement, Rick's forged signatures, the intimidation tactics they've used against business competitors. I was waiting for the right moment." Daisy stared at the meticulous records. Bank statements, recorded phone calls, photographs of meetings that painted the Blackwood family as something far more sinister than mere old money snobbery. "Why?" Daisy whispered. "They're your family." Sophia's smile was sharp as winter glass. Family is supposed to mean something. Honor, loyalty, protection of those who can't protect themselves. All I've seen from them is corruption dressed up as breeding. She leaned forward. Harold saw it too.
That's why he chose you. James Morrison reviewed their evidence with growing amazement. The financial crimes alone would destroy Eleanor and Rick, but combined with Harold's journals documenting their threats and manipulations, it became a devastating legal arsenal. We file everything simultaneously, Morrison advised. Criminal referrals for embezzlement and fraud, civil suits for the forged documents, and a public statement explaining Harold's reasoning. We don't just defend, we obliterate their ability to continue this war. The counterattack launched on a Tuesday morning with the precision of a military operation. Federal investigators arrived at Eleanor's door with warrants, while Rick found his bank accounts frozen pending fraud investigation. By noon, every major newspaper in the city carried headlines about the Blackwood family scandal. Eleanor's perfectly constructed social facade crumbled in hours. Country club memberships were quietly revoked, charity board positions disappeared, and decades of carefully cultivated relationships evaporated as associates fled the toxic association. Rick's situation became even more desperate when news of the investigation reached his creditors. The men with scarred knuckles returned to his apartment, no longer interested in negotiating payment plans. At their apartment that evening, David confronted Daisy with a fury she'd never seen from him before. His face was flushed, his usually gentle demeanor replaced by something ugly and desperate. "You've destroyed them. My mother is facing federal charges. Rick's life is in danger. And for what? Money you never needed?" "For justice," she replied quietly. "For all the people they've hurt over the years. For Harold's memory." "Harold's memory?" David's voice cracked. "Harold's dead. This vendetta won't bring him back, but it's going to destroy what's left of my family." "What about your wife?" The words came out harder than she intended. "When do I become your family, David? When do you stop choosing them over me?" His silence stretched between them like a chasm. Finally, he spoke, his voice hollow with defeat. Maybe we should separate for a while, until this settles down." The betrayal hit her like physical pain. After everything, the harassment, the social warfare, the attempt to steal her inheritance, her own husband was abandoning her. But Daisy had learned something about herself in these months of battle. She was stronger than she had ever imagined, and she no longer needed anyone's protection or approval. "Fine," she said, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall. "But understand this. I'm not backing down. Harold trusted me with his legacy, and I won't let his faith be wasted because your family can't accept that their victim finally learned to fight back." That night, alone in the apartment she had shared with David, Daisy received a call from Lisa Rodriguez. "Mrs. Daisy, you should know. Mr. Rick tried to break into the estate tonight. The police arrested him, but he was carrying a gun." The war had escalated beyond financial battles and social maneuvering, with Rick's desperation driving him towards violence and David's abandonment complete. Daisy realized she was now fighting not just for her inheritance, but for her life. 2 days after Rick's arrest, Daisy stood alone in Harold's study, sorting through his business files. The mansion felt different now, truly hers rather than borrowed space. She'd moved in after David left, claiming the master bedroom Eleanor had vacated in disgrace. The sound of breaking glass downstairs made her freeze. Rick was supposed to be in jail, but bail had been posted that morning by an anonymous benefactor. Eleanor's remaining connections, no doubt. "Daisy?" Rick's voice echoed through the mansion, slurred with desperation and alcohol. "I know you're here. We need to talk." She reached for her phone, but footsteps thundered up the main staircase. Rick appeared in the doorway, his usually perfect appearance disheveled, his eyes wild with the particular madness of a cornered animal. "You ruined everything," he snarled, stepping into the study. $50 million, and you're too stupid to realize you're going to get us all killed."
"Rick, you need to leave. I'm calling the police." He lunged forward, knocking the phone from her hands. "Those men don't care about your legal games. They want their money, and when they don't get it," he grabbed her wrist, his grip painful,
Sign the inheritance over to me, now, before they decide to send a message through you. Let go of me. Daisy's voice carried an authority she'd learned from months of battle. You don't understand. Rick's desperation cracked his voice. They burned down my apartment last night. They're coming for the estate next, and they don't care who gets hurt. The sound of another door opening made them both turn. Lisa Rodriguez stood in the study doorway, her face pale but determined. Mr. Rick, you need to step away from Mrs. Daisy. Rick's laugh was bitter. The maid thinks she can order me around in my own house? This isn't your house anymore, Lisa said quietly, producing her phone, and the police are already on their way. Rick's grip tightened on Daisy's wrist. You think I won't hurt her? You think I have anything left to lose? But his desperation had made him careless. As he turned toward Lisa, Daisy drove her knee into his stomach with all the force her self-defense classes had taught her. Rick doubled over, releasing her wrist, and Lisa was there with a heavy bookend, bringing it down on his shoulder as he tried to straighten. Rick collapsed, groaning, just as sirens wailed in the distance. 20 minutes later, David burst through the front door as paramedics loaded his brother into an ambulance. He found Daisy in the kitchen, Lisa pressing ice to her bruised wrist. My God, Daisy, are you all right? For the first time in weeks, his concern seemed genuine. I'm fine, though her hands still shook. Lisa saved me. David stared at his wife, really looked at her, and saw someone he barely recognized. The uncertain young woman who'd once sought his family's approval was gone, replaced by someone harder, stronger, unbreakable. I'm sorry, he whispered, for everything. For leaving when you needed me most. But Daisy's expression remained carefully neutral. Some bridges, once burned, couldn't be rebuilt with simple apologies. Eleanor's final gambit came wrapped in legal documents and desperation. With Rick in jail and her social empire in ruins, she played her last card, a petition claiming Harold was mentally incompetent when he wrote his will. She's hired distant cousins I haven't seen in 20 years, Sophia reported, reviewing the court filings in Morrison's office, plus 3 former household staff members who conveniently remember Harold acting confused in his final months. Daisy studied the allegations with growing anger. They're claiming he had dementia? Harold was sharper than any of them right until the end. Desperate people fabricate desperate lies, Morrison said grimly. But Eleanor's witnesses seem remarkably consistent in their stories. Too consistent. Sophia realized her investigation uncovered payments to 2 of the staff witnesses, checks from Eleanor's personal account dated just days before their depositions. But Eleanor was clever, using intermediaries and coded transactions. The competency hearing loomed like a storm cloud over everything Harold had intended. If Eleanor succeeded, his will would be voided, reverting to state intestacy laws that would divide everything among his blood relatives. 3 days before the hearing, Morrison called Daisy into his office with unusual excitement. Harold left something else, a video message, to be opened only if his mental competency was ever challenged. Harold's image filled the screen, recorded in his study, just weeks before his death. His eyes were clear, his voice strong and determined. If you're watching this, it means my family has chosen to dishonor my final wishes by claiming I was incompetent. Let me be absolutely clear. My mind was never sharper than when I chose Daisy as my heir. I watched my children become everything I despise about inherited wealth. Entitled, cruel, indifferent to the suffering of others. Daisy showed me what integrity looks like. The video continued with Harold recounting specific dates and events, demonstrating his mental acuity while explaining his growing disappointment in Eleanor and Rick. His final words were devastating. If Eleanor contests this will, she does so knowing she committed fraud against the Children's Education Foundation, fraud I documented but chose not to prosecute while I lived. Eleanor's case collapsed spectacularly. Faced with Harold's video testimony and evidence of witness tampering, her lawyers withdrew from the case. Rick, desperate to avoid additional charges, provided testimony about his mother's embezzlement scheme in exchange for a reduced sentence. The courtroom was packed for the final hearing. Eleanor sat alone at the plaintiff's table, her designer armor replaced by the orange jumpsuit of someone awaiting sentencing for fraud. David had returned to Daisy's side, but his presence felt hollow. Too little, too late. When the judge ruled definitively in Daisy's favor, upholding Harold's will in its entirety, David reached for her hand. She pulled away. "Congratulations," Sophia said afterwards, her smile genuine for perhaps the first time. "You've won everything."
Have I? Daisy looked around the courthouse, seeing only the wreckage of relationships that could never be repaired. Sometimes, winning costs more than losing. But as they walked into the sunlight, Harold's voice echoed in her memory. Integrity isn't about what it costs you, it's about what you refuse to sacrifice. 6 months after the final court victory, Daisy stood in the grand foyer of the Blackwood estate, surrounded by silence that felt more like emptiness than peace. Eleanor had been sentenced to 3 years in federal prison for embezzlement and fraud. Rick received 18 months for assault and financial crimes, his gambling debts transferred to court-appointed liquidators. The Blackwood name, once synonymous with prestige and power, now carried whispers of scandal and criminal conviction. The society pages that had once celebrated Eleanor's charity galas now dissected every detail of her downfall. Former friends distanced themselves with the surgical precision of social survival, leaving Eleanor to face her disgrace alone. The very social circles that had excluded Daisy for years now sent carefully worded invitations, their desperation for her approval almost embarrassing in its transparency. "Mrs. Blackwood," Lisa's voice carried the uncertain formality she'd adopted since becoming the estate's official manager. "The ladies from the Historical Preservation Society are here for their appointment." Daisy watched through the window as 3 women emerged from a Mercedes, their designer suits and practiced smiles marking them as representatives of the world that had once rejected her. They were here to court her patronage, to add her name to their boards and committees, their previous snubs forgotten in the face of her $50 million victory. "Tell them I'm not available," Daisy said quietly. "I'm not interested in buying acceptance I should have received freely." David appeared in the doorway, his face drawn with the weight of 6 months spent watching his family's destruction. He'd moved into the estate's guest wing after multiple attempts at reconciliation, each one meeting Daisy's polite but distant responses. They were trying to use me, just like your family did, just like everyone does when money is involved." David flinched at the comparison. His guilt had become a living thing, eating away at him as he watched his wife transform from the loving woman he'd married into someone harder, more distant. The victory that should have vindicated her had instead isolated her in ways Eleanor's social warfare never could. "I've been thinking about what you said about separation. Maybe it would be better if I moved out completely." David turned from the window, studying the man who'd promised to love her through everything. His weakness had cost them both more than either had realized. "Is that what you want?" "What I want doesn't matter anymore. I chose my family over you when you needed me most, and now I've lost both." His voice cracked with the weight of his realization. "You don't need me anymore, Daisy. Maybe you never did." The truth of his words hung between them like a blade. The uncertain young woman who'd sought his family's approval was gone, replaced by someone who'd learned to stand alone. Harold's inheritance hadn't just given her wealth, it had given her the strength to recognize her own worth. Sophia knocked and entered without waiting for permission, a habit that would have infuriated Eleanor, but somehow felt natural now. She carried a bottle of wine and 2 glasses, her own transformation from calculating family member to genuine friend. Complete. "Rough day?" Sophia asked, noting David's defeated posture and Daisy's carefully controlled expression. "David was just leaving," Daisy said. Not unkindly, but with finality that made David's shoulders slump further. After he left, Sophia poured wine for both of them, settling into Harold's favorite reading chair as if she belonged there. In many ways, she was the sister Daisy had never had, sharp, loyal, unafraid to speak truth when others offered only platitudes. "Do you ever regret it?" Sophia asked, fighting for the inheritance, destroying the family. Daisy considered the question, weighing the cost against the principle.
I regret the pain it caused people like Lisa who got caught in the crossfire. But fighting for what Harold believed was right? Never. Outside, autumn was turning the estate's gardens gold and crimson. The house felt different now, less like a mausoleum of old money privilege and more like a place where something new might grow. 1 year after Harold's death, Daisy stood before the bronze plaque mounted outside the renovated carriage house on the Blackwood estate. The Harold Blackwood Foundation for Educational Opportunity, it read, in simple, elegant lettering. Below that, in smaller script, opening doors that wealth once closed. The foundation's first headquarters occupied what had once been Eleanor's private retreat, a space that had symbolized exclusion, now transformed into a center for inclusion. Inside, Lisa Rodriguez managed a staff of 12, coordinating scholarships, mentorship programs, and educational grants for working-class families throughout the region. The Morrison family from Toledo just got the acceptance letter, Lisa reported, her smile radiant as she showed Daisy the thank you note. Full scholarship to Ohio State for their daughter Maria, first in her family to attend college.
Daisy felt a warmth that had been absent for months. This was what Harold's money was meant for, not maintaining social hierarchies, but breaking them down. Each scholarship recipient reminded her of herself at 18, smart and driven, but lacking the connections and resources that opened doors for the privileged. David appeared in the foundation's doorway, looking uncertain despite the invitation Daisy had extended. 6 months of separation had changed him. The soft weakness that had defined him was gone, replaced by something more solid, though fragile. He'd been attending therapy, working through the guilt and family conditioning that had paralyzed him during their crisis. "I brought the files you requested," he said quietly, setting down a box of Harold's business documents. "The pharmaceutical company records, the real estate holdings, everything you need to understand the full scope of what you inherited." Their divorce had been finalized quietly, without the media attention that had surrounded the inheritance battle. David had signed away any claim to Harold's legacy, asking only for photographs and personal mementos that held sentimental value. The gesture had surprised everyone except Sophia, who understood that some forms of redemption required sacrifice. "Thank you," Daisy said, meaning more than just the documents. His work helping establish the foundation had been meticulous and selfless, a way honoring Harold's memory while seeking his own forgiveness. David nodded, lingering in the doorway. "The Riverside Community Center called. They want to know if the foundation can help fund their after-school program. We'll make it work." Daisy's response came without hesitation. She'd learned to trust her instincts about which programs deserved support, usually the ones that reminded her of her own childhood, when caring adults had made the difference between success and surrender. That evening, Sophia joined Daisy for dinner in the estate's smaller dining room, a space that felt warm rather than imposing. Their friendship had deepened over the past year, built on mutual respect rather than family obligation. Sophia had left her law firm to establish a legal aid clinic funded by the foundation, providing free representation to families navigating education systems and bureaucracy. "I had an interesting visitor today," Sophia mentioned over wine. "Eleanor's lawyer called. She wants to meet with you." The news shouldn't have surprised Daisy, but it did. Eleanor had served 8 months of her sentence and was due for release on parole. The federal prison system had been a harsh education for someone accustomed to privilege and deference. What does she want? Forgiveness, apparently. Or maybe just closure. Her lawyer says she's been participating in victim impact programs, trying to understand the harm she caused. Sophia paused, studying Daisy's expression. "You don't have to see her. No one would blame you for refusing." Daisy stared out the window at Harold's Gardens, now maintained by a crew that included several foundation scholarship recipients working part-time while attending community college. The estate felt different now, alive with purpose rather than frozen in tradition.
2 days later, Daisy sat across from Eleanor in a small conference room at the federal facility. Prison had stripped away the armor of designer clothes and professional makeup, revealing someone smaller, frailer, more human than the formidable adversary who had once orchestrated her destruction. Eleanor's hands shook slightly as she spoke, her voice lacking the commanding authority that had once intimidated judges and society matrons alike. "I won't insult you by claiming I'm sorry," Eleanor began, her words carefully measured. "I'm sorry I got caught, sorry I lost everything, sorry I'm here, but I'm not sorry I fought for what I believed was rightfully ours." Daisy had expected anger or manipulation, not this raw honesty. "Then why did you want to see me?" Eleanor's composure cracked slightly. "Because I need you to understand something. Harold wasn't wrong about us, about me, about Rick. We became everything he despised about inherited wealth. You proved worthy of what he left you." The admission hung between them, heavy with years of resentment and recognition. "I watched the news coverage of your foundation, the scholarships, the community programs. You're using his money the way he would have wanted, the way I never did. And what do you want from me? Absolution? I want nothing from you. For the first time in my life, I want nothing from anyone." Eleanor's smile was bitter but somehow genuine. "I just wanted you to know that Harold chose well. I hated you for it, but Harold chose well." Driving home through the autumn evening, Daisy reflected on the strange peace that conversation had brought. Eleanor's acknowledgement couldn't undo the damage or heal the wounds, but it provided something she hadn't expected to need: validation that her fight had been worth the cost. The foundation's lights were still on when she reached the estate, Lisa and her team working late on applications for the spring scholarship cycle. Inside the carriage house, young voices mixed with older ones as volunteer mentors helped students with college prep courses.
This was Harold's true legacy. Not the wealth itself, but the opportunity to use it for something larger than personal comfort. Daisy had inherited his money, but she'd earned his vindication through every choice she'd made since. 2 years after Harold's death, the Blackwood estate hummed with life in ways it never had during its decades as a monument to privilege. Children's laughter echoed from the renovated stables, now a summer camp for scholarship recipients. The formal gardens, once Eleanor's pristine showpiece, had been partially converted to vegetable plots tended by urban agriculture students learning sustainable farming techniques. Daisy stood on the mansion's front steps, watching as cars pulled into the circular drive for the foundation's second annual gala. Unlike the charity events that had once filled these spaces, exclusive gatherings where the wealthy congratulated themselves for token donations, tonight's celebration honored the scholarship recipients themselves, with board members serving as waitstaff and donors sitting at tables hosted by the students they'd supported. "Nervous?" Sophia asked, adjusting the simple black dress she'd chosen over the elaborate gowns that had once been required at Blackwood's social events. "Excited," Daisy corrected, smoothing her own understated blue dress. She'd learned to dress for the people she served rather than the ones she wanted to impress. "Maria Morrison is giving the keynote speech tonight. Remember her? The first scholarship recipient from Toledo." Maria had graduated summa cum laude from Ohio State and was now in her first year of medical school, her path from working-class struggle to future physician representing everything the foundation was meant to accomplish. Her younger brother had just received his own scholarship, continuing a chain of opportunity the foundation had made possible. Lisa Rodriguez approached from the mansion's entrance, radiant in a dress that would have cost a month's salary in her former life as a housekeeper. As the foundation's executive director, she commanded respect from university presidents and community leaders who had once barely acknowledged her existence. "The caterers are ready, the sound system is tested, and I have good news. The Patterson Foundation called this afternoon. They want to partner with us on the Rural Education Initiative, full funding for the next 5 years." The Rural Education Initiative had been Daisy's latest expansion, bringing scholarship opportunities and educational support to small communities throughout Ohio and Pennsylvania,
places like her own hometown, where bright students often saw no path beyond factory work or agricultural labor. David appeared from around the corner of the mansion, carrying a box of programs. Their divorce had been final for over a year, but their working relationship had evolved into something resembling the friendship they'd shared in graduate school before family pressures and inheritance battles had poisoned their marriage. He'd found his own form of redemption in service, managing the foundation's financial operations with a precision that would have made his grandfather proud. "The programs look good," he said, setting down the box. "I included the update on our college completion rates. 83% of our scholarship recipients graduate within 6 years, compared to 58% nationally." Those numbers represented more than statistics to Daisy. They were proof that Harold's faith in her stewardship had been justified, that his money was creating lasting change rather than merely maintaining the status quo that had once excluded her. As evening approached and guests began arriving, Daisy noticed a familiar figure standing uncertainly at the edge of the parking area. Rick Blackwood looked different after 18 months in federal prison and 2 years of community service. Thinner, grayer, but somehow more solid than the desperate man who had once threatened her in Harold's study. He approached cautiously, his hands empty except for a small envelope. "I wasn't sure if I should come," he said quietly, "but I wanted to give you this." The envelope contained a check for $50,000, not a fortune by Blackwood standards, but likely everything Rick had saved from his construction job and his court-mandated financial counseling. "It's for the scholarship fund," he explained. "I know it doesn't make up for what I did, but it's what I can offer now." Daisy studied her former adversary, seeing genuine humility where once there had only been entitlement and rage. Harold would have been proud of this choice. Rick's smile was sad but real. "Maybe. I'm trying to figure out who I am when I'm not expecting everything to be handed to me. It's harder than I thought." Inside the mansion, the gala proceeded with warmth that contrasted sharply with the cold formality of Eleanor's charity events. Scholarship recipients shared tables with their donors, telling stories of challenges overcome and dreams pursued. The evening's program featured not corporate sponsors seeking recognition, but students expressing gratitude and sharing their aspirations. Maria Morrison's keynote speech brought tears to eyes throughout the ballroom as she described her journey from a Toledo housing project to medical school, crediting the foundation not just for financial support, but for believing in her potential when others saw only limitations. "3 years ago, I thought college was for other people with money, connections, and advantages I'd never have. The Harold Blackwood Foundation didn't just give me a scholarship, it gave me permission to dream."
Later, as guests mingled in the reception, Daisy found herself in Harold's former study, now her office, looking at a framed photograph of him from his final years. Sophia joined her, carrying 2 glasses of wine. "He would have loved tonight," Sophia said, raising her glass in a toast. "All those young people, all those possibilities. This is what he meant when he talked about family. Not blood relations, but people who share your values and support your growth." Through the study's windows, they could see the foundation's summer camp participants, now counselors themselves, helping to clean up after the gala, their easy camaraderie and shared purpose, creating the kind of family bonds that couldn't be inherited, only earned. A soft knock interrupted their reflection. David stood in the doorway, holding his phone with an expression of wonder. "I just got a call from the University of Chicago," he said. "They want to create a Harold Blackwood professorship in social justice, funded by our foundation, full endowment, with preference for professors from working-class backgrounds." The news felt like Harold's final blessing. His name now associated not with the accumulation of wealth, but with its meaningful distribution. Daisy thought of the young professors who would benefit, the students they would inspire, and the ripple effects that would continue long after she was gone. Outside, the estate's lights illuminated gardens where children from every economic background learned together. Buildings where opportunity was cultivated rather than hoarded, and spaces where Harold's true legacy,
The radical idea that worth was measured by character rather than birth flourished. Daisy had inherited Harold's money, but more importantly, she had inherited his vision of what wealth could accomplish when guided by conscience rather than greed. The fortune that had once divided a family now united a community, creating the kind of lasting impact that no amount of accumulated privilege could achieve. In choosing her as his heir, Harold hadn't just given Daisy his wealth, he had given her the chance to prove that true nobility lay not in what you inherited, but in what you chose to do with it. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.